welcome to everybody. Elizabeth, you can give me just 1 second. I want to do something first. Okay. What I'd like to have is a moment of silence for Charlottesville, especially for Heather, who was senselessly killed on Saturday. And this is from Nelson Mandela. You might have read it in the paper. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So I just wanted to acknowledge what happened on Saturday. So, introduction of elected officials. So, Elizabeth, come on down, the mayor of Benicia. Woo! Elizabeth Patterson.
So you can come tomorrow night when we have a council meeting that's dealing with some non-controversial issues like cannabis, water bills, and increasing engineering, planning, and building fees, all just really enthusiastically embraced by the community. Thanks, Greg. You're appreciating that. I am here to welcome all of you for a really important session, if you will. We are conveying to the Air District the importance of our air quality and our concerns. We feel that for a very long time, we have not been getting the data and the recognition that we are impacted not only by events that occur elsewhere, but also by the accumulation of releases from some of the refineries, as well as the freeways, the marine traffic, and all that stuff. We think we have an air pollution problem. And so this is an opportunity to talk about not just the catastrophic events that happen from time to time, but frankly, the more dangerous, which is the chronic. So if we could, I'm looking to you to raise questions, to ask questions, to help the district understand what our concerns are and what we are hoping that comes out of the scoping session. As my understanding is, this is not an official published scoping session, but the district, of course, will not ignore the comments that are made and for the record. So I wish you well. I'm going to stand in the back until I go to my 7 o'clock meeting, and so I'll be listening very carefully. If you have any issues or concerns that you want to talk to me later, I maintain open office hours every Monday from 6 to 7. No appointment is necessary. I'm readily available on email or by phone, so let me know if you have any concerns. And I want to thank Monica Brown very much, and Stephen Hallett, where did he go? Thank you. And we look forward to some more attention spent here in Benicia. Thank you very much.
Steve Young, the Vice Mayor, did you want to say anything? You're more than welcome to come up and speak. Okay, then not at this moment.
We go by the Air District. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out. My name's David Ralston. I'm a Community Engagement Manager with the Air District. And thank you for hosting this meeting to Supervisor Brown. I would like to introduce Air District staff who are here. If you guys could raise your hands, please. We have with us Director Wayne Keno, Director of Compliance and Enforcement. We have Director Jamie Williams of Engineering and Information Technology. And we have Pamela Leung, Engineering Manager. Barry Young is with us from Engineering. And we have other folks from the Community Engagement staff, Azibuke Akaba, Ayla Peters, who's a Vallejo resident. Who am I missing? Oh, Tom Flanagan, sorry, Tom. We rode up here together. Tom from our communications officer. He was talking. Okay, so we realize that you got, thank you for your time. We know this issue of a lot of importance and passion to you, so thank you for sharing your comments. And you're going to hear this from our engineers, but just to preface, we don't want to seem obtuse or what have you, but formally for this scoping session, we're taking comments on the scoping on the EIR, which you'll hear about, and that's our formal role here as the Air District staff. So thank you.
Constance, A round of applause for Constance, who's given her time up, videotaping this. And she's been instrumental in spreading the word about Air Watch air monitors. So if you want more information, the website is airwatchbayarea.org. So pay attention to that. Tonight's meeting, which you already pretty well know, but let me just reiterate because as many of you know, I taught school for 39 years and you have to repeat yourself all the time. Meeting is being held to inform the public about the proposed Phillips 66 expansion and to ensure that Benicia is given a voice. So please make sure that you guys exercise that later on tonight. The comments are going to be filmed. We're going to send them to the Bay Area Quality. Comment cards are available. They're in the back if you wish to fill this out and write your comments. So either way, whatever you feel comfortable doing, you can do both. You can write them and then you can get up and speak. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. And Constance will, and we're going to stand right here, and Constance will videotape them. So without further ado, there is a PowerPoint of which I am not in control of. So who's doing that? Okay, so come on up, sir.
Kind of a short introduction is that, I've been with the Air District since 1989 in the engineering division, and we reviewed many projects. This is a significant project, and that's one of the reasons we're doing an EIR on this permit application. We appreciate Supervisor Monica E. Brown for setting up this meeting, and I think that it's very important that the public participate when given the opportunity to review or to give input on projects such as this. So anyway, good afternoon. Again, my name is Barry Young. Thank you for attending today's meeting. Today's presentation, we will be telling you about the Air District, about CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. We'll give you information about the project and the project timeline and the public comment opportunities. For public comments, we will be providing you with an email address to send your additional comments, or you can fill out the comment card today. Some general background. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District was established in 1955. The Bay Area is a major metropolitan area with 101 cities, 9 counties, but only part of Sonoma and Solano counties, and 7 million people. The Air District's mission is to protect and improve public health, air quality, and the global climate. The Air District is subject to the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act, better known as CEQA. So here's an overview of CEQA. As I mentioned, the Air District is subject to the requirements of CEQA. The basic goal of CEQA is to develop and maintain a high-quality environment. To that end, CEQA requires agencies to inform decision makers and the public of the potential implications of discretionary actions. Examples of non-discretionary projects include dog licenses, car registrations, marriage licenses, and business permits. Discretionary actions include projects like this one. CEQA requires agencies to evaluate and disclose environmental implications of actions, for example, for plans and permits. CEQA avoids or lessens the significant environmental effects where feasible through project alternatives or mitigation measures. So that's important because CEQA, really the teeth of the CEQA review to reduce the emissions is through project alternatives or mitigation measures. A mitigation measure is a strategy taken to reduce or eliminate a project's expected environmental impacts. For example, installing solar panels or LED lights to reduce electricity usage. So here's a slide on the CEQA review process. CEQA requires agencies to disclose the environmental effects of actions. CEQA also requires that the public be given opportunities to comment on the environmental review of these actions. For this project, the public comment opportunities are that on June 14th, the notice of preparation, which identifies potentially significant impacts for analysis, draft EIR, was released to government agencies and posted on our website. For this project, we accepted comments at the June 22nd scoping meeting in Hercules and the July 27th scoping meeting in Vallejo. Scoping meetings offer the public an opportunity to make comments on the environmental analysis that should be done in the draft EIR and to collect concerns of other government agencies. We are also accepting comments during the scoping period, comment period. We will be providing you with an email address to send your additional comments, or you can fill out a comment card today. Also, you will be given the opportunity to make verbal comments at this meeting. The scoping meeting comment period is from June 21st through August 28th. In addition, the draft EIR public comment period is expected to occur late this year. The purpose of the scoping period is to provide opportunity to tell the Air District what potential environmental impacts, mitigation measures, and project alternatives you would like to see addressed in the draft EIR that is being prepared. All comments will be accepted and considered by the Air District. If you want to make a comment but don't want to speak, fill in and hand us a comment card at today's meeting, or email your comments to us later. Now, Pam will tell you about the project itself.
Thank you, Barry. I'll just say a few words about the project. So, first of all, just wanted to show you the location of the Phillips 66 refinery here on the map. It's in the area that's got a black box around it, and it's a few miles southwest of Benicia. Okay, this is an aerial view of the refinery. The photo shows the property boundary lines of the refinery in green. On top of the photo is the marine oil terminal, which looks like a T. So the marine terminal is located in San Pablo Bay and Carquinez Strait, adjacent to the Rodeo refinery. It's in unincorporated Contra Costa County near the town of Rodeo. The refinery encompasses a total of 1,100 acres of land, 500 acres of this are active, and 600 is more of an undeveloped area. The marine terminal covers 16.7 acres of leased, filled, and unfilled state of California owned sovereign land in the San Pablo Bay. The Rodeo refinery and the marine terminal are permitted by the Air District as one facility, although the marine terminal is separated from the refinery by the Union Pacific Railroad. The onshore surroundings of the marine terminal and the refinery property are all zoned heavy industrial use by Contra Costa County. I'll give you a project description of the wharf project that's coming up. The refinery processes crude from a variety of domestic and foreign sources that are delivered by ship or barge at the marine terminal. They also process crude from Central California that's delivered by pipeline. This project, or the proposed project, would increase the amount of crude and gas oil delivered by ship or barge to the marine terminal. The project would allow the refinery to receive more ship-delivered crude and gas oil, and therefore replace roughly the equivalent volumes of pipeline-delivered crude. The project would require a modification to the Air District permit. Since only the mode of crude delivery is changing, the project does not affect the characteristic of the crude and gas oil the refinery is able to process. So for this CEQA review, the scope includes the following. We have a change in the existing permit limit at the marine terminal. The limit right now for offloading would go up by 78,000 barrels per day from 51,000 barrels per day to 130 barrels per day. And this is on a rolling 12-month average. The increase in ship-delivered crude would cause a rise in ship traffic at the marine terminal. They've requested an increase of 76 ships per year. So right now they have 59, and this would potentially increase up to 135 tankers or ships in any 12 consecutive month period. This project for CEQA will include permitting actions we previously made at the marine terminal in 2013. This permitting action back then was to increase the offloading to 51,000 barrels per day. I think originally it was about 30,000. This project does not change any equipment at the terminal, and aside from previously permitting actions for storage tanks in 2013, this project actually does not modify any other equipment whatsoever. And as I mentioned earlier, in regard to the refinery capabilities, the refinery will operate as usual. And the project does not include any change in the overall amount or type of crude oil or gas oil that the refinery can process. I think Barry's going to finish up with some more CEQA requirements.
So far for CEQA, the Air District released the Notice of Preparation on June 14th and held scoping meetings on June 22nd and July 27th. The preliminary environmental review identified 9 areas for consideration of effects. The 9 areas where there is a potential for environmental effects were determined to be aesthetics, air quality, biological resources, greenhouse gas emissions, hazardous and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, noise, public services, and energy conservation. The Air District scoping comment period ends on August 28th, 2017. This diagram shows the next steps. There will also be a draft DIR comment period later this year after the draft DIR is released. All comments received will be considered by the Air District. So by August 28th, 2017, written comments should be sent to the email address here on the slide. If you want the email address, I can write it for you. See me after the meeting. There will be ongoing opportunities to comment on the project. You can fill in the comment card today, make your oral comments that are being video recorded, or send an email to our email address. And we've gotten hundreds of comments via the email address. So it's we're definitely going to read through those and consider all the comments received.
My first question is, has Phillips disclosed what kind of oil they're going to be transporting?
That is not as part of the application, so it's something that's we are not privy to actually. So that's no. So we can. So we can look at historical trends. So we do have access to that information, and the crude that comes into California comes from a mix of places. So some of it comes from California. About a third comes from California. This is generalized for all of California. About 10% comes from Alaska, and the remaining is foreign imports. That portion comes from a variety of places, which can be the Middle East, Central South America. There is a portion that comes from Canada. Overall, the refinery is configured to operate with a certain mix of crude that comes in, and they're not looking to change that. So when we look at this application, they're not requesting to change anything about the general composition of the oil that's coming in.
So we had a similar situation when Valero wanted to do their crude by rail project, and they did not want to disclose where the oil was coming from. And so on the Planning Commission, we had to make certain assumptions because they would not talk about it. And the assumptions were that it was going to be Bakken crude from North Dakota. And so we operated on that assumption. And we used that assumption, which was never negated or contested by Valero, to make, when we did the environmental analysis, we thought it was impossible to make a rational decision if we didn't know what we were dealing with. And I think the same situation applies here. The media and the understanding seems to be that it's going to be tar sands oil. And if it's tar sands oil, that has certain characteristics and qualities that are very different than Bakken crude or the oil that they're currently getting from Central California. So if you're going to be replacing oil from Central California with tar sands oil, which is much heavier and much dirtier, it's hard to understand how the Air District can say there's going to be no change in emissions, no change in equipment. I think as a baseline, it would be necessary to have that basic information for the public. And I think to have anything less makes this whole thing somewhat suspect in terms of a real analysis of the environmental impacts.
Stephen Hallett was Supervisor Monica Brown's office and Vallejo resident. Thank you to the Air Quality District for being here. A couple of comments I wanted to make is that right off the bat, when the draft environmental impact report comes out, it should be a 60-day comment period or whatever the maximum amount of time that you may give for comment periods. It should be that amount of time. There should be meetings held in all of the cities that will be impacted to take comments on the draft EIR. And kind of along the lines of what Vice Mayor Young was mentioning, is that the type of oil specifically needs to be analyzed, the type and the volume. And there was the suggestion that this would not change much of their operations because it would no longer be coming in by the pipeline. So one of the mitigation measures that should be imposed upon Phillips 66 is that they should never again be able to use the pipeline to ship for pre-ship levels of oil through their pipeline. That should never be allowed. So those are my comments. Thank you.
I'm Greg Karras. I'm a senior scientist with Communities for a Better Environment, and I first want to say thank you, Supervisor Brown, for doing the right thing and telling the truth. We cannot We cannot survive continued expansion of oil infrastructure. It's way past the time where it should be built or permitted, especially in our community. This is a bad project, and everybody knows it who's thinking about it. And districts should be joining us in saying so, and the district should be shouldn't be permitting it, shouldn't be processing this permit. It's against your mission. So I wanted to say something specific about the quantity of oil. 130,000 barrels is the capacity. I know, and district staff know, that about 3-4 months ago, Rule 13.1 draft, the district calculated the amount of oil that this refinery in Rodeo, and remember its front half in San Luis Obispo, refines, and how much it can refine. So there's about 30 to 40,000 barrels per day that's coming in from the southern end of the refinery. If it doesn't close down, if it doesn't close down, we're talking about an expansion to 160, 170,000 barrels per day. That's just math. You guys know that. You should be telling the public that. You shouldn't be saying there won't be any change to what's they've got the capacity to refine. We also saw in June where the staff said, "Oh yeah, the refinery's got other projects that if they could get the oil, they could increase their emissions." That was your analysis in draft Rule 1216. So these contradictions are kind of obvious, but just think about the math: 130,000 barrels plus whatever is going to be added from a roughly 40,000 barrel front end of the refinery. And that's assuming the San Joaquin pipeline input goes to zero, as the gentleman said. I think that it's, if you want the community to see any credibility in your analysis and your scoping sessions, you need to deal with the fact that your math doesn't add up. Is this an expansion? Or are you talking about closing down the front end of the refinery? Or are you just hiding it?
Andres Soto, also with Communities for a Better Environment, but I'm also a member of Benicians for a Safe and Healthy Community, and we fought the Crude by Rail project here. So we came to learn many things about the industry and about the district. And so one of the things we were successful in is fighting the Crude by Rail project in San Luis Obispo, the other half of this refinery. So let's applaud ourselves for that. But, you know, these guys don't stop. And so they have another way. They want to bring in the tar sands by ship. That was explicitly a tar sands project. They couldn't hide that. And so now they want to bring in by ship. As Greg was saying, it will be complete expansion of the capacity that they're going to be processing with this concomitant pollution. And I also want to thank our supervisor, our newly elected supervisor, Monica Brown, who's showing effective leadership. When the Air District and other people ignored our community, as they frequently do because we're downwind, Monica Brown stepped up and insisted this meeting happen in our community. And, you know, this is part of a larger program they also have in Contra Costa County. It's called the Northern Shoreline Development Initiative. And they want to reindustrialize the entire shoreline from Rodeo all the way out to Antioch. And that's right across the way. Now, they're not asking anybody over here in Solano County about that, but they are working on that, and they've been working on this for a number of years. This is just one piece of that larger puzzle. Now, that raises a larger question for me about why did Phillips go to the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to be the reviewing agency for this project? Why is it not the Contra Costa County under their land use authority? Why is it not the Bay Conservation Development Commission with their authority over the water? Or what about the State Lands Commission, which had the authority over the Tesoro Wharf expansion project over here in the Straits? Why? Well, what happened with the previous Phillips project that we had to go to court and stop? The Air District rubber stamped the air permit for them. So they know there's not going to be any resistance there. So they're forum shopping and going to a convenience store where they know the price is lowest. And so we should
I
be.
think there's mostly comments, but we have become the lead agency simply because the other agencies have determined there's no additional action on their part, and so that's why we are basically stepping in. We are rarely the lead agency in these types of projects, but we are in this case. They essentially have all the permitting and land use rights for the additional ships and everything. So we are stepping in to be the lead agency. So I can respond to that. But.
Hi, I'm a Benicia resident, Pato Smith. I guess what I'm trying to find out is why, if there's no change in the oil they're going to process or output, why they would even want to change from a much cheaper method of getting their oil, which is pipeline, to a more expensive method of getting it through ships. And I also want to know how the new cap and trade is going to affect this if we're having more dirtier crudes come in via ship, if there's no control that you guys have anymore. So those are my questions. And I'm trying to understand why they're even asking to do this. So maybe you could help to.
I don't want to necessarily give my opinion on why they are choosing to do this. You know, from our standpoint, we're evaluated from an air quality impact standpoint and the environmental impacts, and we have to consider it from that standpoint of view, not from a business or strategic decision. And that's something that we would be looking at. That's definitely part of the evaluation, is the additional ship emissions. And so that's part of what you'll see in the draft EIR, and identification of mitigation measures for that as well.
Yeah, I guess this is the second half. I'm just wondering, with the cap and trade, if there is more pollution with the ships, and they buy pollution credits, and you can't do anything about that, can you? Or if they start processing more tar sands, can you, as a district, stop that in any way?
So you're referring to the expansion, basically AB 398. And there's a companion bill, AB 617. And so we're actually in the process of reviewing the impacts of those, and how that impacts our authority moving forward. We are committed to continue to combat climate change, but as far as our exact strategy on that, that's something that we need to evaluate. We're doing actively, so we're talking with the governor, we're talking with the state assembly, we're doing all of these things. And so we'll be coming forward with our board and our plan, a strategy for moving forward, for exactly how that's going to work.
Hello, James Hinton, Napa, California. Thanks for having this meeting. Nobody so far has brought up the fact that Big Oil has spent records amount lobbying the California legislature in the last 2 quarters, spending over $10 million to pass AB 398. And I'm curious, as you were handing us the clipboard for our information, name, email address, city, as it got handed to me, it said San Francisco, San Francisco, San Francisco. And I thought, wow, a lot of activists. And then it said Backmud as email addresses. So you were all from San Francisco. On September 6th, Phillips66 had a spill that called for shelter in place and sent many residents in this community to the hospital. I'd like to know how that spill affected you in your community and how their operations have.
Yeah, so we were just putting our place of business, our work, so that's why it says San Francisco on that. But I can have Wayne Keno actually talk about the impacts of that.
So we're talking about the spill at the Phillips 66 wharf last year. So we had Actually, the district itself, we had just about 100 complaints from that. If you look at all the complaints throughout the area, Vallejo, Benicia, I think there were well over 1,000 complaints. Those went to the fire department, and they went to the police department, and they went to various cities. So based on that, I kind of have to give you a timeline of how this happens. We respond to all the complaints. So any complaint we get, we try and respond to within an hour. And so when this happens, usually, and we started getting complaints in the Vallejo area first, kind of Benicia, Vallejo borderline, right around that area. So what we normally do with a complaint is usually a complaint is local, something that's fairly local, a local sewage treatment plant, it could be a sewer, it could be some sort of business near where these complainants are. So we dispatched our inspector, 2 inspectors. They answered the first few complaints, and then they went around trying to figure out where this was coming from. So this took a little bit of time, an hour to respond, an hour to drive, get out there and try and contact the complainants. Well, what happened in the meantime is we looked at the sewage treatment plant in Crockett, we looked at across the bay, we looked at all the local sources, and that's usually where an odor comes from. When we realized that Phillips66 had reported some sort of spill on the wharf, we then dispatched some inspectors there also. So it took a little while to figure out where this was coming from. Not usually do you have, usually it's a local source, not usually across the bay or someplace farther away. So that's why it took a little while. In the meantime, we're trying to investigate, see what happened, what caused the oil spill. Was it the ship itself, the Yakima Spirit? Was it the wharf itself? Was there some operational errors that caused the spill? And the Coast Guard was the lead agency on this one. So we worked with the Coast Guard to figure out what was going on. The Coast Guard finished their investigation about a month later or so. And we continued our investigation because of all the complaints, all the impacts that had. We had a lot of people going to the hospital. And so our inspection staff, you have to realize this was an interesting situation. I think it's kind of obvious to all you guys, but maybe it wasn't so obvious to me, where you get this spill, and usually we deal with a point source, a stack, a factory, something that emitted something, and it impacts you, and we can try and find it. This one was a little baffling to us because it was, and if you think about it, it makes sense. It was an oil spill, so it moved with the tide. So we were trying to figure out why this thing was moving around. The sources were moving around. The tide was going in and out. And so it took us quite a while to model. We used some innovative modeling techniques to try and figure out where it was coming from. We picked some sources. Vallejo, Benicia Fire Department was one of them. I think it was Fire Station 13, 12, something around there, the one that was closest. And we documented basically a public nuisance based on all the complaints. It was a nuisance. We're trying to determine the root cause of the spill. And that's still under investigation. Is the ship, the Coast Guard tested the ship, they found it to be sound. Phillips66 tested the wharf and all the piping, they found that to be sound, but something spilled. So we issued to both parties, both the ship and to Phillips66, and we're still in that investigation to figure out what actually caused the oil spill. But the oil spill for certain caused the odors and caused the...
We're talking, it's been almost a year. Okay, here is one of my many concerns, other than the fact that you already guys have my letter, is that I kept asking the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard did not know. Nobody knew. It wasn't until the EIR, the draft EIR came out, that I even knew something was going on with Phillips66. And I'm pretty astute and kind of know what's going on. So I don't know how many of you, but I didn't know it was even Phillips66 till maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. Okay, but that's just me. Maybe because I'm dealing with all these other issues such as flooding and everybody wants to take our water and all those kinds of issues. But sir, that bothers me. Is there not something in everybody's oil that tells you where it comes from? And okay, so doesn't Phillips66, if we went through the water and got a sample and analyzed it, wouldn't it tell us that it's a Phillips66 oil? I mean, I'm a math teacher, so what do I know? But it just doesn't seem right. And okay, it just doesn't. It just doesn't. All right, and I appreciate it, but it still bothers me that it's still almost a year and we're still not figuring this out. And yet you want our comments on something that's going to be almost double the ships And yet we can't figure out it's 59 and then if you add double, so it'd be 200%, something like that. Okay, so I'm really, really, really concerned. And I grew up with smog. I know what smog is like. And I've developed asthma, and I'm sure many people in here have developed asthma. And as we go to solar, and so here's the other question that I have too with mitigation. Who's going to pay for it? And I have to agree with mitigation, because what is it? We put in a solar panel somewhere, and that mitigates what's going on? That does not help me to breathe. Okay, sorry, I had to say something. It was...
Hopefully I can get your questions. So why it took so long, why it was the oil. So I think we determined fairly quickly that the oil came from either the ship or Phillips66. The ship had oil in it. It was, I forgot what the oil was, but there was a fingerprint. We know that it was the ship. But mind you, the ship was offloading this oil, so it either belonged to the ship or to Phillips66. There's a transfer of that material, so it depends on who owns it. Doesn't matter really to residents, because it's spilled, it caused an odor effect. We have to document nuisance in this particular case, and we try and figure out root cause and prevention measures. That's what we focus on. My staff doesn't focus in on fines, penalties, that sort of thing. We focus on root cause, and we focus on trying to prevent it from happening in the future. In the case of the EIR, they have to, since it's an active investigation and open violations, those have to be determined and mitigated during this process. So that still has to happen. And then I forgot there was one more question. Okay, and these are active violations, so they're still in the settlement court process. So there's not, it's allegations, not necessarily certainties.
Yeah, Meitzenheimer. I'm from Vallejo, here for Fresh Air Vallejo. To piggyback on the issue of the spill, even though we know this takes time to work on it, it really doesn't make any sense, because with all the equipment that you have and the specialized scientific things that you put on ships, and it should be automatic when you know when something is amiss and that there's oil going into the water. The problem with it is that we had hundreds of people that went to our hospital. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on emergency services that our city can't afford. So even though they end up with fines, we don't see any of that. So we still have to suffer from that. The other part of that is that, why we're concerned, you probably heard this because you were in Vallejo, but we're going to keep on bringing it up, is that 94590 has one of the highest asthma rates in the state of California. So we want to know about cumulative impacts. We want to know not just with the little bit more that they're going to add to the Bay Area, because we get it, and part of our pollution and part of the problems that we have with the air in Vallejo comes from the refineries, which has nothing to do with Vallejo. We get no tax money from them. We get no benefit from them. We get no money once they've been fined for mishaps. And so we have to deal with it, and the people that live in that area are suffering enough as it is. So bringing more ships in means that there's going to be more pollution coming Vallejo's way, and we get all of it. So we want to know what kind of things that you could do to start studying cumulative impacts for Vallejo and the other cities that are around here. And if there's any kind of measure that could be done by these refineries to make sure that they're putting up monitors so that when it comes out, you don't have to wait for the Vallejo Fire Department or the Coast Guard to respond. It's automatically triggered that somebody's paying attention and measuring what this pollution is. Because we went for hours. The first notification that went out in Vallejo is that it was a natural gas spill. Anybody that smelled it knew there was not natural gas. But the fire department spent a large amount of time traveling different parts of the city trying to find out if there was a natural gas spill. So it was a tremendous amount of pressure and tension in the city, because we didn't know if something was going to explode, if there was some poisonous gas. We didn't know what it was, but it smelled like crude. And I live in the central part of the city, so it took a while before it even got to me. But by the time it filtered over to my part of the city, it had been out for a good hour. And so we just want to make sure that when you're looking at these permits and you're talking to these companies about putting in all this more pollution that's coming in, that you're protecting the cities that don't have refineries, that are downwind, that we don't have to go through this anymore, and that there are some kind of measures that are put in place that you're looking at monitoring this, is like putting a monitor up in Vallejo so that when it hits Vallejo, you know what direction it came from, and then we can have some emergency measures set up to help the people there so they're not suffering from the respiratory problems that we had.
Concern, many of which are in the sort of the refinery corridor. Part of that is also looking at additional monitoring. So we haven't figured out the exact siting of all of those locations, but a significant investment in additional monitoring. We did pass actually a new fee schedule 2 years ago, or about a year and a half ago, to actually have the largest sources of pollution in the Bay Area actually pay for additional community monitors, and we're looking at expanding that. The facilities, the largest facilities actually pay for that. And we're looking at additional funding through cap and trade program and the money that's coming in through that to expand that as well. We are looking at revamping and being more aggressive around implementation of control technologies, and particularly retrofit control technologies for existing facilities. So it's not when you come in for a modification or when you have a new facility or new equipment, but existing equipment that the latest control technologies are put in place on that. And that goes for some of the criteria pollutants of concern, so PM10 and some of these other, we're looking at PM 2.5 and specifically looking at toxics. And so we actually have a regulation that's slated to be brought before our board, and I guess it's September, November of this year, 1118, Regulation 11 Rule 18, that looks at sort of region-wide at reducing toxic air contaminants from existing facilities. So it is an ongoing effort. It's not going to be solved easily, but we do take it seriously, and we are investing in that.
Yeah, I just want to talk in addition, we're also working on the state level. So after the 2012 Chevron incident, there was a refinery task force on refinery safety created by the governor. And so that's every air district that has a refinery in the state, fire departments, local health agencies throughout the state. And with every incident, and I consider these incidents, we do a forensic look back to see how we can prevent those throughout the state. We look at trying prevention measures, and what it does, it creates a good working relationship with all the local agencies so that they can respond and react to those things in a much more timely manner. So it's a statewide effort there that we're trying to help with.
Yeah, so the EIR has a lot of information in it. One of the areas that is looked at in detail is cumulative impacts of a project in relation to background. Oh, okay. It's yeah. So cumulative impacts is one thing that's evaluated in the draft EIR. The draft EIR also looks at mitigation measures, and mitigation measures are the cost of the mitigation measures is paid by the project proponent. So in this case, that would be a Phillips 66 cost. Another thing is that the draft EIR looks at is, in addition to mitigation measures, it also looks at monitoring. So one of the things in an EIR is an analysis, and there's a mitigation monitoring plan that is part of a draft EIR that requires monitoring and also requires mitigation measures, and there are enforcement mechanisms to make sure.
On part of the 2012 analysis on the Chevron incident, the Chemical Safety Board came up with some recommendations, and part of the recommendations were evaluating near misses. So every time there's a problem in a facility, even though it didn't result in some catastrophic emission or some minor emission, what they suggested and what we're doing throughout the state of California and here is looking at these near misses to see what could have prevented those near misses and trying to prevent those things in the future. They didn't result in huge emissions or that sort of thing. We may have been monitoring those, better monitoring and so forth, but the recommendation in which we're implementing is to look at near misses. So to prevention, more monitoring, and looking at the.
Hello, my name is Joanne Finucci, and I live in Pittsburgh. one of the 11 towns named as a sacrifice zone by your district. It's on your website. I'm here because I just heard about this 2 days ago, and I just want to step back for a minute. I need a break, okay? I need to just have people breathe and just step back, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the bigger picture, which I'm not hearing at all. I'm hearing a lot of facts, okay, and hyper details. It does not address the bigger picture. I'm not good at this, so please bear with me. There are 140 Native American tribes fighting pipelines from the tar sands to the West Coast and down. I think this whole thing is, the timing couldn't be worse. What's happening in the nation is preparing the way for oil to take over. It's clear. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. All of these tribes are fighting. This is a war. We're not just talking, we are talking about Benicia tonight and Vallejo, but this is a war, and it's over money. So if we could get the dollar signs out of our eyes and the intimidation by the oil syndicates away, we have to look at what's right. Prevent or monitoring air, you know they lie. You know they lie all the time. We can't trust anything anymore. Now, I mean no disrespect to anyone in this room, because we're all in the same boat. We breathe the air. Have you been in Rodeo lately? Outside? I was on the refinery healing walks that Idle No More SF Bay did for 4 years. I was only involved in the last 3 because I was asleep until then. When I went into Martinez, I'm driving with the windows down. You can smell the gas on a Sunday. I went to Rodeo. I got so sick and nauseous and dizzy on a Sunday. These refineries do not have to be malfunctioning in order to emit pollutions. Now, you can take all your stats, you can tell us anything you want. I should speak for myself, but I know I've got friends in this room. We don't want expansion in this climate, in what's going on in the nation and the state now. Who has the power to say no to Phillips 66? We will say no. And we are fighting to stop the tar sands that are going to, from what I've read, I try to always verify my sources. I don't just speak out of turn. 7 times the tankers coming down the coast. You think the state of Washington's going to let that happen without real resistance? They come in here, tar sands crude sinks. It doesn't float on the top of the water. What's the answer there? The whole thing, the timing is so bad for you to even be wasting your time and wasting our energy on a project like this. Who can say no? Thank you.
My name's Charlie Davison. I live in Hercules. I'm with the Sunflower Alliance, and I live near Phillips 66. Let's talk about super tankers. The Contra Costa County's official Northern Waterfront Economic Development Initiative, NUENDI, they call it. The plan there is to dredge the bay from 35 feet to 45 feet. That is past Chevron and all the way up past Pittsburgh. So the 45 feet will allow large draft super tankers to come in. Another thing regarding the type of crude that may or may not come in, we know exactly what it is. Phillips66 was going to have mile-long trains daily come down to their twin refinery, San Luis Obispo, and Greg talked about piping it up. Well, people down there didn't want it, and every city in California and Sacramento and all the counties and all the way down past the Bay, nobody wanted these mile-long trains coming by their neighborhoods and by their schools. So Phillips66 has a hurting on them. They need some of that crude that they especially like. And so I want to talk about the refinery's currently proposed wharf expansion is in reality a massive expansion of Phillips 66 heavy oil refining, where the project will bring in by ship the equivalent of 2 mile-long tar sands trains each day. That's 2 mile-long tar sands trains each day. Phillips 66 ships will most assuredly be supplied by the Alberta tar sands crude via the recently permitted Trans Mountain pipeline in British Columbia that their government just recently approved. I just want to mention to people here that this is a tar sands project. Phillips 66 is also one of the heaviest crude refineries in the world, where they're able to refine the dirtiest, least expensive crudes to make gasoline. It's called the Nelson Complexity Index. It's one of the highest in the world. It's a pure tar sands refining. Nothing's coming from the Middle East. They're not going to spend more money on it. And they don't have a fluid catalytic cracker. It's a coking refinery. It's the dirtiest in the world. So this is what they do. They use tar sands and bitumen. It's diluted bitumen, which is a solid. So basically, they're going to be turning solid into gasoline and bringing this diluted stuff up to the Bay Area. And if there's an accident, I have friends who worked on the Kalamazoo pipeline spill in Michigan several years ago. Well, because the diluent is in the bitumen, it causes the bitumen to sink over 12 feet into the soil. So it's the most difficult crude in the world to clean up. And they haven't cleaned up the Kalamazoo pipeline spill. And this is what they want to bring in to the Bay Area. Super tankers, equivalent to 2 mile-long tar sands trains per day. And I don't think anybody at the Air District has an answer to this. And I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about what the crude might be.
So all we can say at this point is we will be evaluating the current types of crude and that they're able to refine. So we're not looking at the actual source of it, but looking at the range and the properties and making assumptions based on their current ability to refine the oils that they have. And that is done currently by a mix of sources. So we'd be evaluating it. We do have regulations that we've passed to start monitoring the properties of the crude that they're bringing in and refining on a monthly basis and identifying ways in which we can identify when a change needs to be made or additional controls, a permit application would be required. That is an ongoing.
Well, I may have misunderstood what's going on, but what I thought I heard the lady here from the Bay Area Management District, she said that there would be no difference in the amount of crude brought in and the type of crude brought in. I thought I heard her say that in the beginning. Okay, so I thought I heard her say that, but then I also thought I heard people say that the Bay Area Quality Management District did not have the right to ask Phillips what kind of crude they were bringing in. So to me, that's a contradiction. If you don't have the right to ask what type they want to bring in, how can you say it's going to be the same as what they already have? And if everything would be the same, then why does Phillips want to make this change?
So they're not required to tell us where they're getting the crude from. We are monitoring the crude that they are bringing in, and they are required to report that to us for evaluation. And what I was trying to state before is we're making the assumption that they can bring in the range of crudes that they're currently operating. So that would be historical, based on historical data.
Okay, hello, my name is Seamus Thornton. I am a resident of Vallejo, California for the past 17 years and lived in the Bay Area for 28 years. I want to thank you for being here on an evening. It makes it convenient for us to come in. But I wanted to emphasize what Liat had said about cumulative impacts and say that that's probably the area of most concern. I'm going to be lobbying all of my elected officials and representatives to try to become involved in this project, to let them know that Vallejo has been identified as a city that suffers from serious asthma rates, and we've already been identified by the state of California as a community that's been adversely impacted by pollution. So the concept of cumulative impacts is that a combination of pollutants or just a little bit more pushes you over the edge, and it's like the frog in the water pot that's getting hotter and hotter, and they may just be putting up the fires a little bit more, but we're the ones getting cooked. And so I want to also thank you for being so tolerant of the angst that's coming your way, but we've been doing this for a long time. In 2004, Vallejo was challenged with the LNG regasification facility proposal from Chevron and Bechtel, or Shell and Bechtel, or whoever it was. And at that point is when we looked at the environmental impact report. They were telling us it should be good for us, and I saw that the toxic release from just this one project would be more than the cumulative impact of all 6 refineries, and that blew my mind. And then I became aware of what the refineries are doing to us, and we're at the mercy of what direction the wind blows. So I want to take into consideration not just the expected result, but what's the worst case scenario when there is an accident, when the benzene gets out. This benzene is a carcinogen. The benzene is what they use to dilute the bitumen. So if there's a spill of that, or what gets out when they're reasonably transferring it from the ship, if they can't tell us how that spill occurred in September, no one's coming forward. They know. Somebody knows. That's my opinion. So trust is definitely not going to work. We need to assume the worst case scenario in the environmental impact report and have them. What we need to do is find grounds on which to say no, and it's going to be cumulative impacts. It's going to be lack of political report from the community. What has been happening is everybody's being driven out of the city and moving into these beautiful communities. They've been discovering Vallejo, beautiful old houses, and and they are not going to put up with this stuff. So we're politically going to say no, and we're going to find mechanisms to evaluate the toxicity of the project and say this is why we're saying.
First, I want to thank Supervisor Monica Brown and Stephen for having this town hall meeting tonight. There were 2 prior backmud permits approved in the last 5 years. Back in 2012, the permit to increase from 30,682 barrels per day to 51,182 barrels per day, as well as a previous permit to increase from 51,000 barrels per day to 78,000 barrels per day. And now we're looking at from 78,000 barrels per day to 130,000 barrels per day. So my question to the district is, for the 2 prior permit approvals, were you the lead agency at that time? Second, what were the mitigation measures proposed at the time, and why did those mitigation measures, if they were discussed at that time, fail to prevent the last September's oil spill, which sent 100 citizens to the hospital? And did the district consider the closure of Doctors Medical Hospital? As a member of the Richmond Progressive Alliance, along with Andre Sotos and many others, we were fighting to keep Doctors Medical Hospital at that time. Unfortunately, it closed. So did that take into account during that time? Because it's unfortunate that Doctors Medical Hospital, the last public hospital around, closed, and the nearby public hospital is more than 100 miles away. So that's what I like to that's the answers I would like to hear. And speaking of air monitors that were mentioned earlier, during the past 2 permit approvals, how many air monitors were proposed back then? Because community members informed me that Vallejo only has at least one air monitor. Why aren't there air monitors around the waterfront of Vallejo, Benicia, as well as many of these refinery towns? Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So I guess there was one question about the projects that were previously where the district received a permit application for those. What I recall is that the district was the lead agency for those projects, for one project. And, talk closer to the mic. Okay.
So we were the lead agency. My understanding is we were the lead agency for the project in 2013, and there was a negative declaration determined on that particular project. As far as the details, we can happy to get back to you with the details around that.
I think you had asked why is there one air monitor in Vallejo and not any more, like along the waterfront. I think that's what you asked. So basically the one monitor that's in Vallejo is an ambient air quality monitoring station. So we have a network of stations throughout the 9 counties of the Bay Area, and they're designed to measure like average air. I mean, it's to meet standards in federal standards, and they're designed and located to be average air. So they're not meant to be located near facilities, near something that's going to impact the major in a major way. The way we handle stationary sources, the way you're talking about, and we are taking a new look, as Jamie has said, was that we monitor in stacks on the fence line. Normally is how we monitor. If you looked at the Phillips spill, there was some pressure monitoring to see if the transfer was how the transfer was happening and so forth, and so we have some indications from those monitors what was going on. But in terms of monitoring for incidents or releases, we try to rely on our in-stack monitors, our process monitors that we have in the facility. And in our new rules, we're going to have some additional fence line area monitors and also some community monitors that we're going to be requiring be installed. So there's a whole network of monitoring. I think 617 also requires community monitoring, the new AB 617. So that's all refineries, yes.
Yeah, so we passed a regulation 1215 that looks at installing additional monitors. These are for the highest emitting sources in the Bay Area, so sources of air pollution, which would include the refineries or other facilities that are included in that. AB 617, which was mentioned previously as well a little bit, requires additional monitoring, and that's what I mentioned was looking at, particularly in the Cal EnviroScreen areas. And 1215 also looks at additional fence line monitoring. So the 1215 monitoring is at the cost of the facilities, and the AB 617, we're figuring out the funding sources for those and where that's going to come from.
Hello, and thank you. My name is Don Osborne. I'm also from Vallejo and also part of Fresh Air Vallejo. And thank you, Monica, Stephen, and David, and all of the people for coming up from the Air Quality Board. We like having you here. We like being able to ask you things, and I hope we're asking tough things that you can help us to understand, because the learning curve on this is really steep. You've heard from a number of Vallejo residents about our concern about cumulative impact. One of the things that goes hand in hand with that, because we are largely a minority and poor community, is environmental justice. Is there an environmental justice component of this EIR, and how can we make sure that it recognizes territories that are not in its county, that the air impact will affect Vallejo, will affect Benicia, will affect a lot of communities that are poor and minority?
Yeah, we've that comment was expressed at the scoping meetings, and yeah, we received the comment.
So we will be looking at, and part of the identification is the impacted areas, potentially impacted areas. So it will not be just Rodeo where the refinery is. So that's part of the reason why we're here tonight and doing scoping meetings, and we'll have the draft EIR comment meetings in several locations. As we do mention, we look at cumulative impacts, and part of that, is the burdening of some of those communities that are gathered in that. Outside of the CEQA process, as I mentioned, we're looking at these community risk reduction plans to look at additional ways we can address it, because it may not be fully addressed through the permitting process. I think what I was saying is that the community risk reduction plans are really looking at the environmental justice aspect and how do you incorporate that in, not just through permitting, but also through incentive programs and other things that can help address the cumulative issues that are there in those communities.
Hello, my name's Mark Alkelt from Vallejo, and I'm with Citizens Climate Lobby and Californians for a Climate Tax, and we address all emissions, normal and abnormal, to address climate change. And I just want to follow on the other lady's comments that this is really a bad time to consider expansion of a refinery because climate change, increasing temperatures, and all the other effects. And so had SB 775 passed, there would have, Citizens Climate Lobby works to put a price on carbon, and had SB 77 passed, that would have really influenced this whole conversation because the emissions would have been limited just by increasing the price of carbon. So I'd just like you to take into consideration the urgent need to reduce all emissions and, you know, limit the capacity of Phillips 66 refinery.
I'm Catherine Black, Venetians for a Safe and Healthy Community. I just want to do a follow-up on Steve's question, which was regarding emission monitoring. So as I understand it, there is no emission monitoring in Benicia other than inside the refinery. And as I also understand it, that is done, it's self-monitoring. Is the ideas of all these new monies coming in perhaps that may give us some local fence line monitoring, is that going to be self-monitored too? Because I don't trust those guys.
Yeah, I know everyone talks about the self-monitoring, and it's true. The monitors are installed by the companies and maintained by the companies. We do have a pretty robust QA/QC control over that. So we go in unannounced. We'll stick our probes in with their probes to test to make sure that they're accurate. We do those things unannounced. We also monitor the air itself and do side-by-sides, and we take samples. So there's a QA/QC portion of that, and I know it's not 24/7 and we're doing it or we're paying for it, but there is some aspect where we're double-checking it to making sure that they are reading accurately. If they don't read accurately and we find a discrepancy, we'll cite them for accuracy, look back at all the old data and try and make some corrections. But typically, most of these monitors are, they're instruments that are calibrated, maintained by these people who manufacture these things, and they're guaranteed for certain accuracy.
We are also expanding our monitoring network, as Wayne mentioned, that we would be monitoring and maintaining. So there'll be a combination in the future going.
Hello, my name is Laura Gracia with Communities for a Better Environment. I want to thank you all for being here. I know it's Monday and, tired, but thank you all for being here. And thank you for hosting this and inviting BACMed. BACMed, it's a long drive. Thanks for being here. I want to echo cumulative impacts, and I want to echo that in conjunction with environmental justice. So environmental justice, I want to make sure that it's clear. Young folks below the age of 5, teens are included as well. Older folks, undocumented folks that don't have access to health centers, communities where there are no health centers, folks that don't have access to insurance, people of color. I just really want to make sure that we're not having this really narrow version of what environmental justice means. And so we really need to look at folks that have had asthma and respiratory health issues, and in the communities where it's been overlapped. So this isn't a one single-sided issue. These are communities that are dealing with life day to day, and it's young people as well. And then it was funny because one of the questions was what was your personal story when the oil spill happened? And you started talking about data and monitoring. And I was in here. and I'm sure that these folks have way more compelling stories. But some of our youth members shared, as you know, just about last week, it was the 5th year anniversary of the Chevron fire, and some of our young folks shared their stories. And one of them was, she lives right down the street from the Chevron refinery, and she went inside and she put a wet towel. She grabbed all of her siblings, put them inside the house, closed all the windows, put towels underneath all of the doors, and yet still they all got sick. They all have asthma, so they were like rushed to the hospital. And that is a much more compelling story that cannot be overlooked when you're going through this EIR process. So that's why I'm going to highlight that cumulative impact. And also you keep saying that you're not increasing it, but you are increasing it. And also you're not requiring them to update their infrastructure. So again, that's what happened with the Chevron fire. They were processing a lot of crude oils. It was inadequate infrastructure, and they were taking care of it. So we need y'all to really be on it and have adequate infrastructure. And just, this is your community, and they're telling you don't do it. They're telling you we don't want this. So listen. Thank you.
My name is Gary Hughes, and I work with Friends of the Earth. I'm actually a Berkeley resident right now. I live and work in Berkeley. I'd like to thank the supervisor very much for hosting this. I'm glad to be here. And folks from BACMUD, I have a couple comments I want to make on behalf of our organization. First, to be able to adequately assess what kind of risks there are to the marine environments because of this massive increase in waterborne deliveries of crude, it's an imperative that we have information about the source and quality of these crudes that are going to be delivered. It's impossible to make an adequate assessment of the marine risks without knowing what's going to be in the ship. So it's your responsibility to find out and inform the public about what it is that's going to be coming in those ships. With that, the cumulative impacts must be accurately described. So this would include a very easy to understand description for the public, not only about the increase of marine traffic for this particular terminal, but how that fits into all of the other marine traffic for the other industries along the way here, including the other refineries. For instance, it would be great to be able to know exactly how many ships will be coming in to load and ship out the 25,000 barrels per day of refined products. But there's no information even in here about that. So this information about cumulative impacts must be included, and it must be included in a way that the public can easily understand what's going on. And I will say right now, my concern is that BACMUD is hiding the ball. And if you're not hiding the ball, then the refinery is, and it's your job then to find it and not to make it hard for us to know what's going on. So with that then, I'd like to touch in on the cumulative impacts. Well, let's look at the Yamuna Spirit incident. The Yamuna Spirit, that's the name of the ship that had the accident here. And with Friends of the Earth, we work with organizations all around the world, and I've worked extensively with some colleagues in Nigeria. Apparently, Yamuna Spirit was involved in a spill in the Niger Delta in February 2016. This is the kind of information that should be made available to the public. So we recommend that the Air District halt this permit revision process until we have the information about what happened that day. That we know what happened that day. We know what happened before the ship got here. And we know why it is that ship left so quickly. Because there is some indications that perhaps the Coast Guard verified that the ship was seaworthy, but it got out of here awfully quick, which I guess could be great for the San Francisco Bay, because if that thing was leaking, I'm glad it got out of here. But until we really know what happened, there is no reason why the Air District should be letting this permit process to continue forward. That's a red flag. And so with that then, if you're not willing to exercise your authority, perhaps the State Lands Commission should be the responsible agency for this. That's my comment.
Hi, my name is Larney Fox. I'm a Benicia resident. Quick comment, the email address you provided, if you wanted the public to respond to you, next time maybe pick a shorter email address. I understand that that Phillips 66 is not required to say what kind of oil they're going to be shipping, correct? Oh, so they've told. So, but I think I heard you say that Phillips 66 is not required to tell you what kind of oil is coming in. So did I mishear that? Okay, but they are required to report lots of things and a lot of information in the EIR. So who makes the requirements of what they report and what they don't report?
So the EIR will assume a range of the types of crude that will be brought in, and we will be evaluating that. So, and that will be based on what we know they're capable of refining currently, because they're not looking at changing, they're not requesting a change to their current operations. So as far as reporting of where the crude comes from and those sources, it's fairly complicated, but in some cases we can get through regulation, and we've been legally challenged on some of this to get that information, but we're not currently getting that in real time, the sources of crude oil. So that goes to the Air Resources Board and other locations where they're required to report. It's all I can say is it's not us in terms of, yes, we can require properties and information about the oil that they're refining, and we've done that, and we're tracking that for the purposes of evaluating permit applications and compliance of their operations and their operating permits. That's within our authority and our jurisdiction. But as far as regulating the sources of where their crude comes from, that is not in our authority.
I don't think we're talking about regulating the source or where it comes from, but rather disclosing it. And to say that the mix is not going to change, I think is a little disingenuous, because as Mr. Karras said, right now they're bringing oil from Kern County. They're going to cut that off and replace it with oil brought in by ship. Well, clearly that's not going to be the same kind of oil. It's your responsibility as the permitting agency. We're trusting you to be dispassionate, objective, and not simply accept what they tell you without some kind of verification. And the idea that this is confidential information is, frankly, not proven. That's the same argument that Valero used before. We can't tell you what we're going to bring in. So we had to make assumptions that based on where the train tracks were coming from, it was going to come from North Dakota and it was going to be Bakken crude. I think you can make the same kind of assumptions with this. These are tankers that are going to be coming from British Columbia, tar sands oil. Did I hear you correctly that you said after the fact, if you find out that they're bringing in nothing but tar sands, then maybe you could then go in and look at their equipment and the emissions? Did I hear you right? Did you say that earlier?
So essentially what we are working through regulation we passed is reporting on the types of crude slates, the overall properties of the crude slates that they're using. It's a mix and a blend from different sources, Saudi Arabia, from Middle East. So it comes from a lot of different places, and they're mixing these together. So we basically look at establishing a window in which the types of crude in which they can operate. So it's true you're not going to get the exact same oil from Kern County coming in from ship from somewhere else, but the idea is that they have to operate within a certain window, a certain type of crude that they can refine. They want to operate outside of that, they're going to have to change their operations, and they would have to submit a permit application at that point in time before they can start doing that. Well, right now it would be in their interest to come and tell us, because otherwise they're going to be operating without a permit, and they're not going to be able to run their refinery efficiently if they're going to make significant deviations from the types of crude that they're using. So we are also looking at different ways in which we can require triggering of those permit applications, but we're collecting data to figure out the exact way to do that. So part of that is for consideration into our permitting rules of being able to be proactive of when there is this crude slate shift that they are required to send a permit application. And that would be through compliance, through monitoring, all of these. We have a couple of different efforts that we're looking at. Right now it's after the fact, and we're looking at how we can make that proactive.
So a related question then has to do with the route of the ships themselves. And you said that you couldn't ask where they were coming from. Or maybe I misheard you. But my point is, when you're going to do an analysis of GHG emissions coming from tankers, and we know from our experience with the EIR for Valero that their evidence said that it was significantly more polluting to use tankers than trains. Well, to make the analysis of how much more polluting and how much greenhouse gases will be emitted, you need to know where they're coming from. And what Valero said is, well, they come from all over the world, and we'll give you a number of 5,000 miles and just sort of accept that. I think in this case, you need to say, okay, what's the distance from British Columbia? And we're just going to use that as the number. And how does that number, whatever it is, the state, AB 32 says the state is going to reduce greenhouse gases by 40% by 2020. So how does, a question for the EIR will be, how does the increased emissions from the tankers and the increased emissions from the refinery, based on the refining of dirtier, heavier oils, how does that address the state requirement to reduce GHGs by 40% by 2020? And my last question then has to do with liability. We had a hard time getting an understanding between the oil company and the rail company, and in this case it would be the oil company and the shippers, who's responsible in the case of a spill. Is it the shipper? Is it the oil company? And considering this, we assume, and nobody's refuting that it's going to be tar sands oil, which is going to sink to the bottom of the bay if it leaks, who's responsible for that massive cleanup? Will that be determined at all?
So I'll try to answer your second question, and maybe Wayne can answer the liability question. So you were asking about how do we calculate the GHGs in the EIR? Ultimately, we're going to have to make some assumptions based on where the oil is coming, where it's known to come from historically. And so, we have to consider the possible locations in which it will come from. We will be identifying, quantifying those GHG emissions in the draft EIR, and we invite you to comment. We would like that to be clear. If you have comments at that time, we will take those comments and we'll respond to those comments. So we will have to make some assumptions based on where the known sources of oil are in the world. We do know that, so we have, but we can't say exactly, and we haven't actually gotten through the draft analysis yet. So that's something that we'll be working through. We will present, and we would happily accept and want comments on that to make sure that it's clear. If there are areas that we don't feel like we address appropriately, we'd like to respond to that. So as far as the liability question,
the only thing I can answer that is in this latest Phillips 66 bill, we issued to both the ship and to Phillips 66 the wharf. So in our minds, we're trying to determine who is responsible, more responsible, partly responsible. All those questions are still up in the air. And our attorneys tell us that there can be a shared responsibility for that if we can't pin it to one or the other. So that's the answer. If one is clearly at fault, like the ship had a leak on it, and it wasn't coming from any of the connections, it was coming from some other part of the ship, obviously the ship is responsible. If the leak was coming from the piping after it left the ship, then Phillips 66 is clearly responsible. So anywhere in between is up for question, and in any oil spill, that's the case.
Constance Butel, Benicia Good Neighbor Steering Committee, and a member of the Airwatch BayArea.org refinery community, fence line community group. And I do encourage everyone to go to that website, airwatchbayarea.org. You can start to see all the refineries in the North Bay area, wind direction, and reported monitors, where they have monitors. Right now we have a $200 off-the-shelf monitor at Russell Woodworks that measures volatile organic compounds and dust. So the question is, when will Benicia get fence line community monitors, and will that be real-time data that will be accessible real-time to the public? Thank you.
Yeah, I could tell. Okay. So basically we passed a rule, when was it, last year? Yeah, that required fence line monitoring. So the fence line monitoring, in the rule, there's specific deadlines for the facilities to send in monitoring plans. They did send those in. We reviewed those plans. We have so many days, I think it was 45 days, something around there to review those plans. We reviewed them. We sent them back for improvements. So there's another 45 days there. After that, if they don't make the corrections or they do make the corrections, then those go out for public comment, and then that's when, once those are approved, the installation process begins. So I'm looking at, if I'm looking at what's specifically in the rule, we're looking at, I believe, the second 45 days is due at the end of this month, sometime around this month. I can't give you exact days. And then there's another 30 or 45 days after that. So we'll know for certain public comment period is what I was talking about during that time period. So the public will have an opportunity to see those proposals, comment on those monitoring plans that the facilities are proposing, and this is fence line monitoring. In terms of community monitoring, we have a funding mechanism in the rule.
Yeah, so the siting for the community monitors, it takes, from what I'm told, from between a year and 12 to 18 months per monitor. So that process has started, but it requires permitting, power, all those things. So as far as the exact timing, that's where I was saying I'm not exactly sure when that's coming, but in the foreseeable future, in the year or two, we'll start to see those in different locations. And the other part is on the data side. So we are investing in making the data more readily available. Some of it is currently available on our website. We're looking at expanding that. The goal is ultimately to get to some sort of near real-time reporting. You do have to keep in mind we do a significant amount of QA/QC on the data that comes in, but we are looking at how we can turn that around and making it more available to the public. So it is an important part of it. We're trying to make sure that it's understandable, and as those projects roll out and you start to see those, again, we'd like your feedback and input on how useful they are, because we do expect them and want them to be consumed by the public.
Okay, so I'm going to be the bad person here. It's 8:15. Hold on, it's 8:15. And so Constance is willing to, I'm going to just volunteer you for those of you who want to do a verbal comment, she'll videotape you for 3 minutes. If you want to do a written one so that we can give it to the gentleman and lady up here, or we can always mail it in, because I'm looking at the time and I'm going to be running out of time because we have to be out of here at 8:30.
To remind people that we will be coming out with the draft EIR at a future time, and we're going to make sure to hit up a lot of different communities. But also on your way out, if anybody's interested in signing up for Air District, to make sure you get on our e-blast and our information, we'll have a sign up in the back. So do you guys?
No, I want to thank everybody for coming and sharing your comments and your concerns. So we do take it seriously. We know that there's angst around this project and other projects. And we do want your comments, and we do want to respond to those. So just thank you for your time.
Yeah, will BACMed be requiring Phillips66 to electrify their port so that when the ships are docked, they are not running their engines to offload their oil, but are in fact going to be pumping it out with electricity provided from onshore, so that all those ships are not spewing their pollution.
I just had one question, which was, so they've told us that the Rodeo refinery is not going to be processing this dirtier crude. So makes me think, well, what are they going to do with this? First of all, I don't believe that assumption, but if they're not going to do that, what are they going to do with this? I don't know this facility like I know the Valero facility. Do they have offloading, truck loading facilities to be able to load this into trucks and then take it throughout the Bay Area? Is there already an existing pipeline system to pipe it all through the Bay Area? Those are the things I want to know.